When Zach Lavine requested a trade, or at least I should say it's being inferred as a trade request, even though he's never come out publicly saying that he wants to be traded, but when it came out that both sides would be open to moving him in a deal, the thought at that time was that it was all but a foregone conclusion that Zach Lavine would be traded at some point before the deadline. Might take some time to get a deal done given the restrictions on certain players throughout the league not being eligible to be traded by December 15th and for some on January 15th, but the thought was a deal would at some point get done. But as the weeks pass, December 15th has gone by, and while Zach Lavine, the trade rumors continue to swirl, we as fans keep messing around with the trade machine, but as time passes and more reporting comes out, it's now becoming a little more uncertain that Zach Lavine will in fact be traded by the deadline. And in fact, Bulls insider Casey Johnson has reported that the Bulls are going to need to start preparing for the real possibility of Zach not getting moved and him remaining with the team beyond the deadline. You have on top of that all the reporting both nationally and locally that the market for Zach Lavine is pretty bare right now, with teams not showing a ton of interest in acquiring the star guard. And while I still think the Bulls will ultimately find a new home for Zach before the February 8th trade deadline, it does make you question what happens if the Bulls aren't able to find a trade for Zach and how that impacts the team and the resurgence we have seen from them most recently since the last 11 games that he's been out. So let's dive into it a little bit further. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, it's no secret the Bulls have looked like a completely different team since Zach Lavine went down with an injury. The Bulls are 8-3 in that time frame. They're playing with much better pace, ball movement, they're shooting significantly better, they're playing with much better energy, effort, and they're just looking much happier out there as a team, playing smart team basketball. And for fans, us fans, that has been much more enjoyable of a team to watch than we saw at the beginning of the season. Now, as much as some would like to blame this all on Zach Lavine and say that he was the problem, trade him ASAP, we don't need him, I don't think that's entirely fair. Yes, Zach is and was part of the problem. Yes, he slowed down the overall offense. Yes, Zach and his attitude and body language didn't help. And yes, Zach had a hard time accepting his role in the team, would try to do too much and force the issue so he could get his shots up. And generally speaking, Zach Lavine hasn't always been the best decision maker when he's on the court. But the fact of the matter is, it was more than just Zach. Everyone is accountable to come out ready to play with maximum effort. It wasn't on Zach Lavine. It wasn't his fault that both Coby White and Patrick Williams were shooting terribly to start the season. It also wasn't Zach's fault that DeMar's shot was off or that he wasn't playing defense himself. And it wasn't Zach's fault that Vucevic at times seemed a bit checked out. The team was playing poorly, they had lost interest, and didn't even look like they cared about playing together. So while I do think, yes, Zach was part of the problem and a big part of the problem, at the end of the day, basketball is a team sport, and you had a lot of guys not showing up well to start the year. But here's the thing, if the Bulls aren't able to trade Zach Lavine, and we'll talk about what that means by not being able to trade him, because not being able to trade him and unwilling to trade him are two different things. But if they're not able to move him, I actually think it would be a disaster for the Bulls, and it's for a few reasons. One, Zach for the most part has checked out on this team. He made it pretty clear he didn't want to be here, and the news and rumors already out there about him wanting to go elsewhere, he knows that, and his teammates know that. It's very hard to come back from that in the locker room when your teammates know that at one point you quit on the team. It's really hard to get that trust back and convince your teammates that you're committed to staying with this organization. Very bad for team morale if you're sort of just forced to keep a player that doesn't want to be there because you couldn't find a good enough trade for them. Second, the morale and the team knowing that he doesn't want to be there aside, the Bulls also know now that they're actually fine without him. They don't need his added offense when it has provided more opportunities and shots for Patrick Williams and Coby White, who have stepped up big time since Zach's been out. And the Bulls have realized the ball and the offense flows much more freely when you don't have two ball-dominant, heavy isolation players. Because here's the thing, DeMar DeRozan should not be absolved of any blame in the Bulls and their slow start, because his style of play and slowing down the offense is a big reason for the Bulls' struggles in the early going. But it's much different when you have one player like that versus two. You can get by with this type of play when you have just one ball-dominant heavy isolation scorer because it's only one mouth to feed. And the difference between DeMar versus Zach and why having DeMar play that role is more successful for the Bulls is that DeMar is a much more willing and able passer. He's smarter with the ball, not saying he's an elite level IQ type player, but more so than Zach Lavine is, who has always struggled with his decision making and shot selection. DeMar is also a much better mentor to the younger guys. You see that both on and off the court. And he's also shown that he's a player that is willing to accept a lesser role to fit within the overall scheme of the offense. Over these last 11 games, you've seen DeMar be a much more willing passer, not taking as many shots, but still being that veteran to guide the young players in endgame situations or in big meaningful moments, and a player that can help close out games rather than just letting the young guys fend for themselves. And so while we can sit here and say, well, DeMar's got to go too, because even just him by himself, he's slowing down the development of the young guys. No, you actually need a veteran player like DeMar DeRozan to help develop these young players. Zach Lavine, in my opinion, is not that type of player. Because I'm sure some will say, well, if it's just a matter of getting rid of one of DeMar or Zach because both of them don't work together, might as well keep Zach Lavine, right? Because he's younger. Now, Zach isn't that guy. He's not the type of guy that you have as a veteran leader to help build up your younger team. He's just not. Anyway, I got a little sidetracked there, but the other reason I think it would be a disaster if the Bulls don't move Zach is that if he's not moved, it means his trade value isn't as high as he thought. It means the Bulls couldn't find a team that was interested in him unless it was for a super low return, and because of that, if Zach stays, I don't think it's a situation where he just changes his mind and wants to stay with the Bulls. Not when the fan base has kind of been down and out on him knowing that he wanted out. No, he's going to do everything in his power to up his trade value post the trade deadline before the end of the season so he can be moved in the offseason. And if Zach is only concerned about increasing his trade value and not the betterment of the team, yeah, that's going to spell disaster when you have Zach Lavine, already not the best decision maker, trying to do too much every night just to showcase why a team should want him, which is going to lead to the Bulls back to where they were at the start of the season. Guys being frustrated, slow pace, pounding the ball in ISO plays, stagnant offense, nobody moving around, no ball movement. And I don't know about you guys, but based on what we now know of what this Bulls team can do, and to see them go back to that style of play to start the year, yeah, I don't even think I would be able to finish the season at this point. I can't go back to that. Not when they just became fun to watch again. So look, because I think it would be a disaster for the Bulls to somehow still have Lavine on the roster after the trade deadline, I think it would make more sense for the Bulls to lower their asking price for Zach. At this point, I don't even care if it means taking a fat L on the trade. I don't care if it means practically gifting a team Zach Lavine. Trade him as a salary dump for all I care. Because you can't have Zach come back for all the reasons I just mentioned. You can't. The damage has been done. We've seen how this team has responded since he's been out. You can't have him staying on this team. Trade him for some bad expiring contracts to free up cap space. That in and of itself is a win to me. I don't even care if the Bulls don't get picks out of it. Like, yes, I would like for them to be able to obtain at least one first-round pick for Zach Lavine, but if there really is no market for Zach, like it's being reported, then you just have to take the L and get minimal return. In my opinion, any kind of return, even if it just means getting his money off your books, is enough of a return than to have him remaining on this team. And yes, sure, there is a world where Zach comes back, makes sacrifices, and does what he has to do to play into the way the Bulls are playing now, but I really just don't see that being likely at this point. I think that ship has sailed. So if I'm the Bulls, trade him at all costs. It would be unacceptable to have Zach Lavine still remain with this team post the trade deadline. Let me know what you guys think. Do you think there is a world where Zach Lavine will still be with the Bulls for the rest of the season? Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.